Welcome to the Advancement Podcast. Our mission is to reach the lost in America by advancing leaders and churches so that communities are transformed. Join us as we discuss how to stay healthy as leaders, work in teams, and lead change. Come on, let's advance together.
Welcome back to another episode of the Advancement Podcast. We are so excited that you have joined with us today. Hey, if you enjoy what you're listening to, if you could go subscribe on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to. If you could also do us a favor and go ahead and rate the podcast, help us spread the word of advancement. If you're watching, click subscribe or like on YouTube or Facebook, and the content comes straight to you every Tuesday and Thursday. I am the host of Advancement Podcast, Todd. I'm here as always with my mucho frazzled friend, Timothy Ware. You doing okay, Tim?
I
know it's been a tough day already.
It's been a tough day. It's been a tough week. So last Monday we
need a hug. You need a hug.
Yeah. Well, all right. So we do our batch recording on Mondays.
Yes.
And last week we ended up with a scheduling thing, had to cancel that. And
yes.
Also last Monday,
yes,
my son called from college to say, "Hey, I had symptoms and of COVID. They've given me a test at the college clinic, and they're moving me to the quarantine dorms, and I have to stay there for a minimum of whatever it is."
Yeah.
So he's been in isolation.
Oh.
He's been in isolation. So
is he an introvert or extrovert?
Well, let me answer it this way. He texted me on Tuesday or Monday night, maybe. No, it was Tuesday. And he said, "When you call me tonight, would you please do it by Zoom or FaceTime?" Because he said, "I already miss faces."
He's an extrovert. Got it.
So we've been calling every day. We're trying to do FaceTime and stuff so he can see people. So it has been and then on Friday, my daughter, as many of our listeners know, she teaches first grade in the Far East in another country, and she's been home doing it, working all night long, teaching overnight by Zoom and things, which has been hectic in my house since COVID. And with all as they've worked through the visa stuff, getting things back in order, so that the final pieces arrived on Friday. So she flies out this next weekend to go back to the other side of the world for a couple of years or however long till she comes home to visit or we see her.
So they're
again.
letting her leave.
Yeah. So it's not about letting her leave; it's about they're letting her in.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So the last few days, I mean, between that. Just other stuff. I mean, this week has been a hairy week, let me just tell you. And it doesn't, Rachel said to me this morning, "Well, by the end of this week, Caleb will be out of quarantine. Liz will be out on the other side of the world, and the cat will be out of quarantine too, because we had surgery on the cat. So it's got the thing around its head." She said, "So life will be at least back to some semblance of normalcy."
Our kids will be out of the house.
So anyway, but today it's exciting to have back with us a returning guest, Dr. Jeanie Clarkson, and she wrote a book called The Emotionally Intelligent Pastor. Right now I feel emotionally drained. I need Jeanie so bad.
You're not emotionally intelligent this morning.
No. You may have to carry the weight here today.
It's not unusual, but it's fine.
Whoa, Dr. Jeanie has a clinic. That's not the right word.
What does she do?
She has a counseling center.
Yeah, that's great.
In Ohio, and she is a great friend. She's a published author and published in magazines, and is just
one of the greatest magazines in the world. Influence
Don't
magazine.
even start with it. You're such a punk. Sometimes.
Straight out of Springfield, Missouri.
So how are you this morning, Dr. Jeanie?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here with you guys this morning. Looking forward to it. And so glad you invited me back too.
Yeah.
Well, the last time that we had her on was right at the beginning of COVID, and we talked about some of the challenges, the emotional challenges for pastors leading in this COVID season. And and she took all. It was such a good episode. She's even written an ebook from the content we did. So if you're interested in it, you can go to, is it on your personal website where that's accessible?
Yeah, go to JeanieMillerClarkson.com. If you don't see it, email us there and we will make sure that the listeners get a copy.
Woohoo.
Woohoo. Well, today we're going to start a series with Dr. Jeanie, and what we want to do is walk through some things regarding really emotional intelligence, because this is if you read leadership books and you read these kind of things, what you realize is that people have talked about IQ. Even in the beginning of her book, she talks about IQ and has been around for decades, but there's this thing of EQ or emotional intelligence and how that equates. And I think a lot of times people have just, number one, they assume, well, pastors just know how to deal with people. They just know how to deal with people.
Yeah.
They know how to read people well.
Yeah.
And
if they knew how much time I spent with my staff going, you can't do that.
So we're excited to have Dr. Jeanie on to talk about this with us for a few episodes. So Dr. Jeanie, why don't you do us a favor? And for our listeners, why don't you let's open up by defining what is emotional intelligence?
Yes, great. Well, emotional intelligence technically is the ability to know what's going on inside of us, our emotions, our thoughts, our reactions, because we're not all in tune with what's going on inside of us. And the second piece is being able to pick up on maybe social cues, to read the mood in the room, to pick up on others' emotional reactions, and then to put all that together and be able to guide our interactions. But let me give you some simpler words. Emotional intelligence is being able to manage ourselves wisely, being emotionally healthy, and being good with people, being people smart.
People smart.
And, the scripture has a lot to say about wisdom, about how we manage ourselves, how we manage our anger, how we manage our fears. And it also has a lot to say about how we manage our relationships. So even though it's a newer concept, in reality, it's not really a newer concept.
Well, I think as I've read through your book and was thinking about today, I recognize that I think there's a lot of pastors, they're better at reading other people than, let's just be honest, sometimes guys I talk to, and even with myself, I struggle more with knowing what's going on inside of me than paying attention to what's going on inside of others.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have a tendency to fixate on others and not focus on the sometimes the inner demons that may be causing the trouble that we're experiencing from others.
It's true.
Is that true, Dr. Jeanie?
I mean, I think that sometimes pastors, it almost comes across in pastors as being passive aggressive. That we're so out of touch with what's going on inside of ourselves that it just explodes out when it finally comes to surface. Is that what you've seen in your research?
Absolutely. And I see that in working with people. We can see other people. Mm-hmm. It's hard to see ourselves. We can watch them, we can observe them, we notice what they're doing, but we don't really, we're not watching ourselves. So, other people may be picking up more on what's going on with us sometimes. But, a lot of times I see people, they, blow up, like you were saying, or get angry. And we're totally unaware that this anger had actually been building up for some time. To them, it seemed like it just happened in the moment. And that's because a lot of times we're not paying attention to what's going on inside of us.
So I think there's a balance piece that in my head was, we're talking about this. I see the pastors that are really high extroverts, and let's be honest, Todd and I are here sitting, we're extroverts. It's even harder
Guilty.
for us to take time to look inside because we love dealing with the outside things and dealing with people, but that moment of introspection is much more difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, we take more time looking at others than we do ourselves.
And introspection has been given sort of a bad name in a way. Sort of like, well, we should be spending time doing things for others and not be spending time focusing on ourselves, which is not the same thing, but it sort of seems that way.
Yes. So when we start thinking about this idea of being emotionally intelligent, being smart, what are some things? Let's walk through some practical pieces for pastors to say, okay, let's first start with the inside piece. How can we develop emotional intelligence within ourselves?
Okay. Well, emotional intelligence, like it's okay, we're going to start with the inside piece. So I'm going to talk about personal insight first.
Okay.
That piece that you were saying about being aware of what's going on with us, because if we're not aware, we can end up doing the same thing over and over, even though it may not be benefiting ourselves or others. Let me give you a couple of stories.
Those
to
repeated
illustrate.
behaviors that get us in trouble all the time. Is that what you're talking about? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, right.
Talking back to your wife.
Okay, well, give us some stories and help us figure out how to become more aware of who we are and what's going on inside.
The first one is about a pastor who pointed out an error that his administrative assistant had made, not thinking anything about it, just a casual Monday morning, went in and said, hey, by the way, there was an error in the bulletin. And she, surprisingly, burst into tears and said, I can't take it anymore. I never do anything right. I just can't work here anymore, and left. Now the pastor sat there dumbfounded, was totally like, wow, he was just pointing out something that she would surely want to know, and did not think that came across bad at all. And so he did something very wise. He went and asked his wife, am I critical of others? Now, see, it's wise to ask his wife, because if you've been married for a while and you ask your spouse for some feedback, generally they're going to tell you the truth. And so he asked her.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Generally. They're just waiting for you to ask.
Sometimes they don't wait, but
that's right. But we don't listen when they don't wait, and we're like, right. You're not true.
So he went home and he told his wife the story and said, do I come across critical to others? And she just looked at him and said, you think? And
now, you weren't supposed to be telling stories about me today.
Yeah. These were confidential things that we had.
This was news to him, because he did not realize the way he was coming across. And so this was a real aha moment for some insight. And this is the way I'm coming across to others. This is not what I want. But he
sounds like a conversation Rachel and I had last year. She said, you're just so cynical all the time.
It's true.
Hey, look, remember, I have not been as cynical this year. This year I said this was the year I was not going to be cynical. So I've tried to be, but everybody else now says, but now we'll just be cynical in your place.
Well, this is a tough year not to be cynical.
It's so hard. Oh my gosh. I can't wait for this year to be over so I can go back to being a cynic. Maybe I shouldn't. All right. So
Stay in your lane, Tim. Stay in your lane.
Let's take a moment and hear a word about advancement.
Do you feel like your church is stuck in a rut? Then we've got the answer for you here at Advancement. Do you need some personal coaching or maybe some leadership coaching? We can help you out. Contact the Advancement team at info@advancement.cc or check out the website at advancement.cc.
Now let's get back to the podcast.
So talk to our spouse is one practical way to become for awareness.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So he found out, he realized he had a choice here. He could have just said, oh, everybody's just being so sensitive and just blew it off and not paid any attention.
Yeah.
But instead, he was so dumbfounded and he asked his spouse and he said, you know, I've really got to take this to heart. This is how I'm coming across. Now, the danger is if he didn't use that teaching moment, he would continue that pattern, continue a negative interaction, and be affecting others around him negatively and not even realize it, which is what had been going on.
Well, we fall into these habits over time, and I think what I just heard you say is that making a shift in becoming aware also is going to lead to new habits in our life.
Absolutely. Yes. That's the second piece, right? After
Okay.
you become aware. But I want to tell you another story, if I may, about Pastor Bill, who is a character
Okay,
in
it's
my
not
book.
Todd.
Bill.
Yeah, it's Bill.
Bill.
Fictional Bill.
That other one felt like Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
Pastor Bill had become very burned out and he'd had some conflicts with people getting mad at him. And so, that's usually when we gain insight, is when something isn't working out. It gets our attention. And we have a choice then to pay attention to it or disregard it. So anyway, Pastor Bill also pays attention to it. And again, he pays attention to the feedback from his wife because she correctly diagnoses the problem.
I'm finding a
You
theme
are
here.
such a people pleaser.
Oh.
Yes, and that's a huge thing in so many of our pastors that there's that tendency to become a people pleaser. So this is great. Keep going. That's good.
And so he decided to do some introspection, but without this moment, at that moment of burnout, that moment of getting some mad at him because he couldn't say no to anybody is reason why.
Yeah.
When you say yes to two conflicting obligations, people are going to get pretty mad at you. So he could have used this moment to just keep on working harder, but he decided to pull back and, listen to some of the feedback he was getting and make some changes. But otherwise, if he didn't really tune in and gain some personal insight, his burnout would continue. His happiness quotient will probably continue to go down. Mm-hmm. So if we don't pay attention to insight, we can continue in patterns that cause us to be less effective or not helpful to others, or we can continue in patterns that are not helpful for ourselves. So it really is important.
So what I've written down is when these moments of when things aren't going right, I think that's a great statement, that the insight comes when things aren't going right. And in that moment, let's take stock of ourselves before we take stock of somebody else. And that
very well said.
And get feedback, and then actually do something with the feedback, don't just let it die on the vine. I think we have one of the things that we talk about all the time here on the podcast and advancement is this idea of holy accountability. And the habit in the American church is to make a judgment, to be critical, to speak some truth, but then do nothing with it. And I think that's if we're really honest, it's a tendency across America, but it is definitely that in the American church. And so there's it sounds like there's also a that could play a huge role, because listening to feedback and doing something with that feedback, in my life, the best way is I require outside accountability, somebody to say, hey, okay, how did you do? And it can't always be my wife, because that doesn't always help the relationship.
No,
not always. No.
It's a good place to have a coach.
Yeah.
Or a counselor working with.
There's really two ways that I see to grow in personal insight. One is feedback. Okay. And sometimes feedback is not always, desired, but even if it's negative, sometimes there's a grain of truth in it. But we can also be open to and solicit feedback. The second is taking some time for self-reflection. And a lot of times we can do that through journaling and taking some of these natural opportunities, if you will, where something doesn't go right, and write down, what are my thoughts? What are my feelings? How am I looking at this situation? And, it quite often more comes out on the paper than what we realized. And so it is another tool to really help us grow in insight.
I had a picture while you were talking about this idea of, it's funny. I know why musicians need to have monitors, because you're trying to listen and you adjust the monitors and you're trying to listen to the band, because it's so you, when you're doing that. But it's amazing how many pastors will stop and they'll say, I can't hear myself in the monitor.
Yeah.
Which I always think, why
do you need to hear yourself?
Why do you need to hear yourself speak? Because I do this all the time, and I don't need to hear myself in the monitor. I just got to make sure you hear me. But there is a reality of it's a great metaphor for creating a loop.
Yeah.
Creating a feedback loop where there's this piece of stuff coming back at you that you get the chance to hear, you get the chance to moderate, you get the chance to reflect on, to create those loops in our life. Dare I say, give people the right to speak into our life, to give us feedback.
Absolutely. Right. And people that you can trust to tell you the truth, because a lot of times people, they only want to say good things.
Yeah, that's true. They need some cynics in their life. Maybe not.
And sometimes it's how we ask the question as well. We can ask people, things like, whatever the topic is, what did you like about how this went? What did you think could be improved on? Or what thoughts came to mind about how to do it different? People are more likely to give you a little bit of feedback if you ask them in the right way. But otherwise, we feel like they should only say good things, like great sermon, thanks for the message. But really, the people see us. They see a lot of things about us. They know how we're coming across, whether we're being effective in our communication. They know how our interactions are coming across, but they're not likely to tell us. So we have to find ways to get that information from them. And so Jeanie, all of us have blind spots.
Yeah. So Jeanie, I got a really practical question I'd like to ask.
Okay.
So say, we're being hypothetical here to protect the innocent. Say we've got staff members, and usually it's for me, okay, that, I can see that the way they handled the problem is the issue, but they can't see or refuse to see
Right.
the way that they handled the problem is the issue, and they're not always willing to take feedback. So what do I, as a pastor, how do I coach them without sometimes throwing gasoline on the fire that's already there?
Right. That's such a good and practical question. And there's one problem which you mentioned, that they're not open to feedback. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So it may be limited in what you can do. However, if you're able to sit down with them in a way that they feel like they're not being called on the carpet, because then their defenses are going to rise up. But in a casual, hey, let's sit down and have a cup of coffee. I noticed there was some problems. Tell me about that, and just get them to talk about what happened. And if they bring up, it didn't go that well, just talk with them about that, and somehow very gently get around to, if you did it again, how would you like to do it differently? Or I wonder if there's a different way you could respond when someone says something like that. So you're
roll around to a
making them
coach
think.
approach.
Yeah. I mean, could you even ask the question, is it all right if I coach you for a second? I mean, give them the opportunity to say it's okay for me to do this.
That's excellent. That's an excellent idea, because it is good to kind of set the stage before we talk to someone so that they react the way that we hope they will.
That's good. I know that in what we do, coaching and consulting and talking with pastors all the time, that this is a critical piece, and I've struggled with it. I mean, I've struggled with this all my life. Being an extrovert, I've been more concerned about taking stock and looking inside. There is a perfectionist piece about me, but at the same time, it's always, it's much easier to make it somebody else's fault, not my own. And so let's just this first part of our conversation, really, how do we help ourselves become a little more, as leaders, as pastors, become a little more emotionally intelligent on the reflective component, this personal awareness side. So Todd, what's your takeaway from this conversation?
A couple things. We often tend to be big people pleasers and not as introspective as we need to be. Self-reflection and journaling is good. I agree with Dr. Jeanie. Sometimes when I start to type out, I'm an external processor. So as I begin to type, things start to take shape in my brain. And when you're trying to help people through situations, get them talking through what actually happened and how they think they can do better next time.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening with us, we thank you, Dr. Jeanie. Make sure to check out Jeanie Miller Clarkson.com. Get some of her resources. Follow her on Twitter and LinkedIn and social media. She's a great resource for you pastors and listeners. And she's going to be back with us, and we're going to continue this conversation, looking at going deeper into how emotional intelligence affects us as pastors. We're not going to get all the way through this because, as we're sitting here talking about it, I actually think we could do a series of conversations on how we use emotional intelligence in our communication and preaching, but we're not doing that now.
Yeah,
that's not.
We'll just have to have her back.
They'll just have to have her back. That's right. So anyway, thank you, Dr. Jeanie.
Thank you.
And thank you.
And we'll be back next time on the Advancement Podcast.
If you would like to keep this content coming, all Tim and Todd ask is $1 per show. See how to give, maybe even sponsor an episode or series on the website advancement.cc. Until next week, continue to advance the mission of Jesus.